That's Jimmy Stein. I'm Clint Lamb, and this is the Cover Crimson YouTube channel. Jimmy, you know what? We're not going to spend a ton of time talking about the Rose Bowl. I did say we were going to give some quick Rose Bowl reactions, and I do feel like it is worth talking about a little bit. And who knows? We might get this conversation started and turn it into a 30-minute conversation knowing us. But the plan is to look a lot more towards the future. A lot of transfer portal talk happening, including NFL draft decisions being made, and that includes Ty Simpson and kind of trying to figure out what Alabama is going to have at the quarterback position in 2026. But before we get into all that, let's talk a little bit about Indiana. 38-3 final score. Wasn't pretty. In fact, it was downright ugly. That's the only way to put it. Just a complete domination in all three phases. Haven't really seen that before, even against Georgia. Like, a lot of their offensive success came off of Alabama mistakes on special teams and offense and shorter fields. And Oklahoma, when they lost to them, similar things. And this one, it didn't matter if they had to go 90-plus yards or 20 yards. They were going to be putting points on the board and making Alabama like it. Not pretty, but it is what it is. What were some of your initial reactions to the game?
Yeah, first of all, just admitting how wrong I was about how it would go. Underestimated Indiana, even though I'd dove pretty deep into Indiana. I just felt Alabama would be really competitive with them. Thought it would be a close game. Said in the score predictions, hey, my first thought is Indiana 21, Alabama 20. But notice that the game didn't even play out anywhere near like that. I remember almost mocking the idea that Indiana would blow out Alabama. To me, it felt like fantasy. Then I watched it happen and realized, nope, that's reality. I like how you brought up the Georgia game. This was different than the Georgia game. Georgia beat the heck out of Alabama, but it was in part due to Alabama errors, Alabama giving Georgia short fields. Now, Alabama offensively did very little or nothing in the game, but Georgia just didn't march up and down the field at will. That game should have ended 21-7, but Alabama went for it on fourth down inside their own 10, gifting Georgia their final 7 points. 21-7 is a far cry from what the heck happened in Pasadena. Indiana, they out executed Alabama. They out hit Alabama. They out physicaled Alabama. They out coached Alabama. They out evaluated Alabama as to talent on the field. I think the talent at Indiana is underrated even at this point. And I think that's going to play itself out in the NFL draft, where some of these Indiana guys, I think, will go even higher than early estimates. Total beatdown. Shout out to Indiana. They should beat Oregon and then win the national championship, which would make Curt Cignetti and the 2-year job he's done at Indiana one of the greatest stories in the history of the sport. I really believe that. Shout out to them. And now, what can Alabama do, Clint? This is what Alabama can do. You've got to get much better. But when I say much better, I want everyone to remember that it's so easy to be negative and in a dark place after that beatdown. It's so easy to do that. Let's remember this. Alabama earned their way into this 12-team playoff, validated their selection by beating a team in the playoff on the road. No one was saying before the playoff that Oklahoma didn't belong. People said Alabama didn't. No one said Oklahoma didn't belong. Alabama goes on the road, beats Oklahoma in round. So top, invited to the playoff, validate their selection, finish in the top 8. Let's remember that Alabama finished in the top 8. That's not good enough. No one's saying it's a moral victory. No one's saying we should be satisfied with that. But this was a top 8 team. It's so easy to think, because of how bad that last game was, that they're not top 20 or top 30 or top 40 or the worst Alabama team in forever. No, that was a top 8 ball club Alabama put on the field. But Indiana proved that the distance between 8 and 1 is vast. That's the distance that Alabama has to improve, from 8 to 1, not from 50 to 1, but from 8 to 1. And Indiana proved there is a considerable gap there. That's what Alabama's got to do in terms of addressing it in the portal and addressing it in development. Get better, get much better. All three phases.
That's exactly right. And I think that's exactly what they're trying to do. But, I think the most shocking part to me, there was a number of things that shocked me in the game, but probably the most shocking was, Alabama had time to get healthy. They had time to prepare. This wasn't like against Georgia. Some of that you can chalk it up and say, man, this is not the typical Alabama team that you should or would get. Guys were banged up, guys were out, and so it was more so understandable. I really thought that Alabama getting healthy and getting some guys back available, whether it be guys who had played but weren't 100% or guys who were out, I just thought that was going to make a significant difference. It did not. The other thing about this too, you look at Alabama's offensive line, and it's big, right? I mean, 4 of the 5 starters were north of 320 pounds. Not one of Indiana's 5 starters along their offensive line reached 320 pounds. Their heaviest was 319. They got 313, 308, 311, 312, averaged 312.6 pounds across the board at 6'5". So this idea that you got to get big and strong and physical, I think Alabama was pretty darn physical throughout the offseason. In some ways, I think they were too physical. Like I've seen some people suggest you need to be harder on them. You got to make them be more physical this offseason. I'm telling you, based off of people that I talk to and stuff, and leading into the season, I don't know that it's possible to get too much more physical. I think in some ways they beat each other up. I think in some ways they were focused on just everybody has said, oh, it's the strength and conditioning coach's fault because they're not big and strong. They're big and they're strong. From a weight room strength perspective, they are very, very, very strong. I mean, to a point where I don't think that should be the focus. I think it's more of getting the mental edge back, playing with more edge and nastiness and things like that. I think that's more so the focus.
Yeah. Big and strong. If it was just about being big and strong, then the best offensive lineman on the team would be Jaden Roberts. And he can't even really get on the field right now. And he's big, he's huge, and he's one of the strongest players in the history of the program. In the history of the program, they keep those records. He's one of the strongest players I've ever had. He's absolutely massive. Couldn't even get on the field. I agree with you 1,000,000%. It's not about being big and strong. It's about just being a better football player, being more athletic, responding to a little adversity, technique, playing with better, more sound technique and fundamentals. But it's not about being big and strong. I don't think there's any failure on the part of the Alabama strength program. In fact, Alabama's got one of the best in the country. They track everything. They improve everything. They know what every number is as it relates to strength and speed, and are always working to improve that using both science and old school methods. I don't think that's the issue. I just think they need more good football players. This team did have a lot of bad injury luck, and I do think that was a factor down the stretch. That was absolutely not a factor in the Indiana game. That was just a complete beatdown. Doesn't matter if Jam was a little healthier and able to play a few more snaps. That wouldn't have mattered, one bit. But I do think, in terms of overall team performance, they had some bad luck down the stretch with injuries. Ty clearly playing hurt, then got hurt. A new additional injury that just became one too many. And his performance suffered. I think one of the most interesting things when you look back over the course of the season, Clint, was Ty's numbers through the first 7 games, and then Ty's numbers the last 7 or 8 games, 2 different players. And you're like, well, what happened? Well, duh, he got hurt. That's what happened. I mean, everybody knows this now. It's even been reported finally. We didn't really want to talk about it too much until it was more of a publicly known thing, although we were always saying, hey, Ty's banged up. Now y'all see, the extent of it. I mean, he got a significant back injury back around, South Carolina, Missouri, and his performance fell off. It wasn't falling off a cliff, by the way. I think when some people see first 7 games, it was this, last 7 games, it was this, his fall off was actually gradual. I mean,
Correct.
it was a gradual decline that by the time it got like, gosh, this just isn't very good, it was so late in the season that making a change, you might have found yourself out of the playoff had you told the committee, hey, our quarterback's hurt, in the last game or two leading up. I mean, the playoff committee can leave you out based on that. And secondly, when you're talking about guys who haven't played, I think we all saw Austin Mack come in and showed I thought Austin Mack showed some good things, but I also think he showed that, hey, it wasn't just about quarterback. I mean, Alabama only scored 3 points with Austin Mack playing virtually the entire half of football, trying to come back and throw it a lot. And, he showed some good things, but just switching quarterbacks, I don't think would have fixed it for Alabama. And I think the Austin Mack in the second half sort of showed that. But at the same time, I thought Austin Mack looked promising. And that's why we're going to focus on the future, Alabama's promising future, because there is a lot to be excited about, even though I know some fans are really highly concerned about who's gone into the portal for Alabama and the number of players who've gone into the portal.
Yeah, one thing I'll say about Austin Mack, to an extent, I feel like a lot of Alabama's players gave up in the second half. I mean, so to a certain extent, like I agree with you. I think it's a combination of you see things and you're like, wow, you can see some of those throws with a little bit more torque on it. The thing about Ty is it wasn't just about the injury. The slow decline, in my opinion, could be as much attributed to the lack of confidence due to the injury and the limitations that it caused. Like, you got to think from a mobility standpoint, they were a lot more safe with him. He's a guy who had played a lot of backyard football in high school and early in his career at Alabama. You saw some of the things that he did, against Mercer, his ability to escape and throw that long pass to Josh Cuevas. You look at some of the things that he did against Wisconsin as far as, off platform, on the run, on the move, flipping his hips around, slinging a football downfield, looks incredible. He didn't have the ability to do those things anymore. And I think that affected him. If you were to take really anybody, any major dual threat quarterback, tell Jalen Milroe he's not allowed to run. He doesn't have a choice. The second he breaks the tackle box, he's getting benched if he takes off and even tries to extend. He's stationary. Would he have been a successful player? No. You could say Cam Newton, same thing to an extent. Like, I think he could probably win from the pocket more, like Lamar Jackson. My point in saying that is to say, when you take away the element of someone's game, some of the things that they do that makes them who they are, sometimes they have a really hard time compensating, and they lose confidence because they're, you're thinking about other things and what you can't do. And so part of that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think there were times where maybe Ty was a little bit, he didn't really trust his protection. He'd get a little, everybody was saying happy feet and take off and running, and he seemed uncomfortable a lot over the back half of the season. And despite the fact that you had no run game to start the year, that was pretty consistent throughout. Now, granted, against Vanderbilt, Missouri, you started to find one a little bit, and maybe that helped him in those games. In fact, I'm sure that it did. But you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, what was the difference? Like, Todd didn't have the protection. It was pretty much the same all year. What was the difference between early season Ty Simpson and later season Ty Simpson? I mean, I think injury did play a part. Now, granted, I think based off of the way that he looked, I don't know if he'll end up coming back or not, but right now it's all about looking towards the future. And how do you avoid a 38-3 beatdown like that against the elite of the elite? Like, you played Georgia, who wasn't a very elite football team, and you went toe-to-toe with them in Athens. You beat them in Athens. And to me, it was pretty evident that Alabama was the better team at that point in time. But down the stretch, when you played the elite of the elite, it was not pretty for you. And that is something that it kind of showed the gap between, okay, if you want to make the playoffs, that's one thing. But how do you go from being a playoff contender, getting in there, to actually being able to compete? That feels like a much different story, and that's what I think Alabama's trying to fix. Now, here's what I'll say. Let's get into the transfer portal talk. It's why everybody's probably here. Well, first of all, we'll start with Parker Brailsford. That's pretty big news, electing to enter the NFL draft. I think the writing was on the wall when they started courting Brock Riker and Caden Strayhorn, and some of these guys, some of these pure sinners. To me, it was like that points to Parker being gone. Some people didn't want to believe it, but the writing was definitely on the wall. He was banged up. I give him a lot of credit because he was not close to 100%. He battled through it late, and that was during a key part of the season. They really could have used a fully healthy Parker Brailsford. Wouldn't have fixed every issue, but it would have helped, I feel like. But he battled through it, did what he could, but he's now going to the NFL. What's your reaction to that?
Well, understand the move on Parker's part. I mean, I have no criticism whatsoever about his decision to enter the draft. I get it completely. I don't think, in terms of Parker's stock in the NFL, I don't think coming back would have made a huge difference for him, because the knock on him is going to be size. Well, that's not going to change between now. It's too late in his college career. He is what he is. So, and he's performed at a high level against really good competition. And now he's been a 3-year starter. He's put a lot on tape. I mean, the NFL is going to watch it all. They're going to go back and watch redshirt freshman season at Washington. They watch all of it. So I get Parker's decision. I would guess day 2 for him, is the likely landing spot, which is really good for an interior offensive lineman. And again, his stock, I don't think would have improved by coming back. So I get Parker's decision and don't criticize at all. Just thank Parker for what he did at Alabama, for coming to Alabama in the first place with the staff, becoming an immediate starter and leader. And Alabama has won a lot of games. They barely missed the playoff last year. They made the playoff and won a game this year. Parker's a big reason for all that, because he's been one of the best football players on the team throughout his 2 years, and a great kid on top of it. Now, what's Alabama going to do with Parker gone? Well, as you've already mentioned, they've offered two centers that are in the portal. Brock Riker from Texas State and Caden Strayhorn from Michigan. Both look like guys who I think would be major immediate starters. I mean, Riker in particular. Strayhorn didn't start at Michigan, but is very promising.
Very promising.
And I think, if Strayhorn is the signee, I'm going to guess that he ends up being the starter if he's the only one that they sign out of the portal. But I like both of those kids, by the way, and I know you're going to tell us about both of them because you've looked, I think, at both of them, or certainly I know Strayhorn. I saw your comment. One note about Strayhorn I think is really interesting. His dad was also a center, so I kind of like that idea where son is a center, dad is a center. That is some good coaching he's getting at home, and not only good coaching. Dad played at Michigan State for Nick Saban,
correct,
which is kind of fun. Like, well, maybe this is why all along they've had an eye on Alabama because of Dad's playing for Nick. So that's interesting. 2 guys on the roster, though, that could be a candidate to be a starting center next year. One, Will Sanders, who I sort of see him as a center. I know he's played primarily guard at Alabama in his 2 years there, won a redshirt year in this past year when he played significant snaps with the ones throughout the year at guard. But Will Sanders is built like a center. He's got a center's mentality. I think he's got some of the same intangibles that Parker Brailsford brought to the table. And I think Will Sanders is a strong possibility to be the center or a contender at center. Again, depending on who they bring in the portal, he could clearly stay at guard and play. He did so last year, and with the first team. Another guy that I know that they're really high on, and this is, I hate calling it scoop because it's not that significant, but I do know that the staff as a whole is very high on Mal Waldrop. They think he's going to be good. Now, he will just be a redshirt freshman next year. He can play center. Mal Waldrop is pretty cool in this way. I don't know that another Alabama player has done this during his redshirt year, but Mal Waldrop, I believe, has practiced at center, guard, and tackle already, which is crazy for just. And I want to say year.
Just about all 5 spots, not just on the left side. I want to say he got work at right guard and some at right tackle as well throughout the season.
I love the fact he was a left tackle in high school at a premier program in Central Phoenix City. It's as good of a program as there is in Alabama, playing nothing but big-time talent every week, practicing against big-time talent every day. And he's a left tackle there, even though all the projections were interior for college and even center. But Mal Waldrop is a guy that could be an immediate contributor if he's healthy. I understand he got banged up a little bit this year, as did every single other player on the roster. Mal got banged up, but should he be completely healthy, I am convinced he will be either a 1 or a 2 next fall at either center or guard, possibly even tackle. But I just want to bring up that, yes, portal center seems to be an answer to what they're doing with losing Parker Brailsford. But as shallow as the depth chart is right now on returning linemen to the team, Will Sanders and Mal Waldrop are potential centers.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, I think I like Will Sanders a little bit more at guard. I understand your logic, and I completely agree with it. It's just, I think Sanders can be a heck of a guard. Caden Strayhorn, another thing about him, Michael Carroll's teammate at IMG, there's some familiarity there. Michael Carroll, granted, I've kind of argued, I think you go after a portal tackle. I would go after a big name portal tackle. I would spend a little bit of money. No, you don't want to break precedent. No, you don't want to set a new precedent by overpaying somebody. I think once you start that, it's hard to go back. But a guy like Jacarius Peak, that's one, the NC State tackle, that I would probably swing for the fences on. From a pass blocking standpoint, from a run blocking standpoint, he's a balanced option, 6'4", 308, not overly long. I think he's got pretty long arms, but from a height perspective, he's not 6'6" or 6'7", not your prototypical tackle. But neither was Troy Faetanu, who I always botch his last name, when he was at Washington under Kalen DeBoer. He was his left tackle. He was 6'4", 317, and he was kind of a dancing bear, very athletic, very physical. And I see some similarities, different styles overall. But as far as the nastiness, the balance in which they play, from a run blocking and pass blocking standpoint, I think Pete could end up being a guy. And if you ended up securing him, you could, at that point, he started off as a right tackle for NC State, got a couple of years starting at right tackle. This past season, switched over to the blind side, performed extremely well there. And, I think he is a left tackle, and I think that's what you would bring him in to be. But the fact that he's got that experience at a high level, also playing right tackle, it's like if the left tackle didn't really work out for one reason or another, maybe you kick him over to the right side. Maybe that would help him. But just having that flexibility with a portal option, I think, would be very beneficial. But more so, I think if you brought in a guy like Peak, you would probably be able to kick Jackson Lloyd, who I think they really like, over to right tackle, move Michael Carroll inside the guard, which I think he could absolutely thrive there. And you could potentially put him right next to his buddy Strayhorn, and they can create a Bash Brothers type of situation at center in one of those guard spots. Both play with the nastiness. I think Strayhorn, one of the problems from a recruiting standpoint, he's only 6'2", so he's kind of like Parker Brailsford in that sense. He's not overly long, and from a projection standpoint, despite the fact that you got those guys like Brailsford who end up being very, very good players and will be NFL draft picks, it's kind of a little bit more rare. So typically you want your center 6'3" minimum, 6'2", you start getting on the shorter side, 6'1's tough. You get a guy like Willie Lampkins, who's 5'11", playing guard and center, and he's on an NFL team right now, but it's there's a lot of concern as far as his long-term outlook. I just think that the offensive line, it's completely up in the air, and everybody's freaking out about it, and understandably so. It didn't perform well in 2025. It fell well short of expectations. A lot of spots did, but I think that's where a lot of your issues stem from. I think if you get better, more consistent play out of your offensive line, some of the other stuff, you still would have had your running back problems. But if your offensive line was good enough, that could have masked a lot of your problems at running back. So while I do think when we get into that position here in just a second, I do think you need to get better play at the running back position. The offensive line not being able to compensate whatsoever certainly made or amplified any issues that you had or shortcomings that you had at the running back position, and having a banged up quarterback. You did nothing. You did very little to protect Ty Simpson after getting banged up. I don't think that was great. Like, just across the board, not what you really wanted to see. But at the same time, some of the guys they're bringing in and, hoping that they might try to court in the transfer portal, I do think that you have a possibility of getting the right guys in from a schematic standpoint, playing with an edge, playing with that physicality. It's not just about the physical makeup and fitting in that sense. You got to fit culturally, and you have to fit just as far as they need dogs. And a guy like Caden Strayhorn, to me, he's a dog. I think that's the way he plays. Parker Brailsford was a dog. And so you're losing that type of player along your offensive line. You need somebody else with that type of mentality. I don't think he's quite as athletic as Parker Brailsford, but he's already 308 pounds, I believe. He already weighs close to 20 pounds more than Parker Brailsford. Only what was he, a true freshman this
True
season? If I'm
freshman
not,
this past year.
so I mean, he's going to be
Even
a
bigger.
redshirt freshman next year. Could have at least 3 or 4 years of eligibility left. I don't know. I mean, he's not super highly rated in the transfer portal rankings. It's because he doesn't have a whole lot of experience. He wasn't super highly rated coming out of high school, and he doesn't have like the size and the physical makeup that maybe you look for and would covet at that position. That combination to me is what's kind of keeping him a little bit further down. But based off of what they're looking for, we've all said, hey, I don't need the 5-star. If the 5-star is a dog and he plays with the nastiness, if he's Michael Carroll, fine, totally for it. But 10-1 rather have the 3-star dog than the 5-star diva. And the offensive line, I think that's exactly the way that you need to approach it. And a guy like Caden Strayhorn, I think he's a lot closer to that than people realize.
Yeah, Indiana just lined up. Indiana and their 3-star offensive line absolutely whipped Alabama for 60 minutes. So people that make too big of a thing about the high school rankings, I mean, just look at Indiana. I mean, it's 3 stars across the board, but they don't play like it. They play like 5-star collegiate stars. That's a great offensive line. And again, that doesn't mean that, okay, we're going to abandon signing highly ranked offensive line prospects and we're going to focus on 3 stars. They seem better. That's not the case at all. I'm just saying people like Strayhorn being a great example. Don't assume because he wasn't super highly rated coming out of high school that he's not going to be a really good college football player. I think there's a lot of evidence from his brief playing time this year as a true freshman at Michigan that he is going to be pretty special coming from IMG, where he was well coached even going into his collegiate career. I'd be excited about adding Strayhorn just simply because it feels crazy to call him a veteran presence, but you can't depend on the high school kids that you sign. Chris Booker, the high school kids that are coming in, they're going to be gravy if they can help you. But the staff's not going to assume that the high school player coming in is ready to play SEC football. They're not going to assume that. That has to be proven. Even Strayhorn will have to prove himself in that regard. But he is a year older. Again, a center that's the son of a center. I think they know him well from just playing with Michael Carroll. I think they kind of know his game. And I think that's why they'd be really comfortable with that. Adding Jacarius Peak at tackle would just be huge. One thing I want to say about, hey, I'm guilty of this. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody but myself. I'm guilty of this too. One thing about Jackson Lloyd, we assume, because he's a 5-star, right? We assume, okay, Jackson Lloyd can hold down left tackle next year. Why are we assuming that? In the real world, there's no evidence that Jackson Lloyd is ready to be a starter other than the fact he was a 5-star a year ago. He didn't play enough football this year and put out enough tape against good competition for us to know that Jackson Lloyd is ready. That's why I think there has to be multiple offensive line signees out of the portal, because the only guys you can assume are definitely ready to play SEC football that are coming back on the offensive line is Michael Carroll and Will Sanders, because you saw them play against SEC competition, against first team SEC competition while the game's in doubt and the game's on the line, and they both did well. Michael Carroll even doing extremely well for a true freshman. Will Sanders proven that he can play at this level. So that's 2. You're just sort of hoping that Jackson Lloyd is ready, and I don't think the coaching staff is going to be comfortable hoping he's ready. I think they're going to bring in guys, and if Jackson beats them out, like Michael Carroll beat out Wilkin Formby, and now Formby's in the portal, we'll talk about that shortly, I'm sure, but Michael Carroll won that spot at right tackle, proved to be a more dependable right tackle to them than Formby was. Therefore, Formby has to move inside and isn't too happy with that and ends up in the portal. Well, Jackson Lloyd will have that same opportunity. He can beat out somebody and prove that he's ready, but I don't think they're going to just give left tackle to Jackson Lloyd. I don't think that's what's going to happen. He's going to have to prove it, and he's probably going to have to beat out some competition. The problem is that competition isn't in the football building at the Malmore right now. They got to bring people in. The numbers on the offensive line are just really low because so many players have portaled out. They've just got to bring in multiple guys, Clint. I'm going to say right now, I'm going to guess it's at least 3. And by 3, I mean 3 guys who are potential starters. They might even bring in 4 or 5 with the last couple being depth pieces. But I think they bring in 3 guys that will be capable of starting against East Carolina.
I think 2 starters is like a pretty safe floor for me right now. It is possible 3, but I would say 2.
Mhm.
And then I would say at least 1 or 2 guys who were, not even the Arkell and Nugans, who I think was very raw. And from a numbers standpoint, you bring him in, he's got some college experience, but he was a lot more raw than I think they were even anticipating, and probably a little bit further off. But I don't even think it's like that type of player. I think it's guys who will compete for a job, but more like the Geno Vandermark when you brought him in.
Yeah.
Wasn't necessarily brought in to be a surefire starter, but to solidify some depth. I think bare minimum, you probably at least get 1 other player
The Mississippi
like
State
that.
kid. The Mississippi State kid might be like that.
Correct.
To me. I think Jimothy Lewis is sort of Geno Vandermarkish in that way. Younger, but
I mean, he couldn't really crack things consistently for Mississippi State. And I know, I've done some stuff as far as covering Mississippi State. Their fans wanted Jimothy Lewis to be a dude. He was a 4-star recruit. They don't get too many of those guys. Everyone that they get, they feel like is really going to help their football team. And there was reason to believe in that because he's an athletic guy, but you kind of saw him. He kind of feels like a left tackle from an athleticism standpoint, things like that, but just felt like from on the blind side. I mean, there were some struggles, probably more of a right tackle, but either way, I think he is like that perfect. If you can get him with the right offensive line coach, get some development out of him, there's still some untapped potential. Don't think you're bringing him in to be an automatic starter, but he would be the type of player that you bring in. Maybe if you got a Jacarius Peak who is kind of locked up one of your spots, you bring in a guy like Jimothy Lewis, you let him compete with like a Jackson Lloyd at right tackle, and then you move Michael Carroll inside the guard. Like I could totally see that being a situation. But, one of the things about Strayhorn that I did want to bring up is that relationship with Michael Carroll. Because, obviously Wilkin Formby was a huge factor in getting Caden Proctor back in Tuscaloosa. That relationship was huge. Strayhorn having that relationship with Michael Carroll. I'm not saying Michael Carroll's trying to jump ship or anything, but I think that, I think they're really good friends. I think from a recruiting standpoint, Michael Carroll could do a lot to get Strayhorn to Tuscaloosa. But, at the same time, I also think Strayhorn could do a lot as far as making Michael Carroll more comfortable. And kind of giving him a friend. Like and if he wasn't a good enough player, I wouldn't be having this conversation. I don't believe in, hey, go sign a guy because he's buddies and he might keep this guy around. I'm saying it kind of fits in some ways, and it's not a good example right now because Ryan Williams didn't really perform how fans wanted him to, and Jalen Mbakwe is now in the transfer portal. But it's kind of similar where it's like there was an element of Jalen Mbakwe's own talent that made him a desirable guy to keep around. But it was also his relationship with Ryan Williams, why he became kind of a guy where it's like he serves multiple purposes that can really help you, and why, I think, maybe he was targeted. I'm not saying it's the whole reason. Once again, nobody run with that, but just something worth mentioning. The other thing I want to talk about, and, on Twitter, I was more selective in how I worded this, but a lot of people are freaking out. Why have you not made any staff changes? It's been like not even 80 hours since the Rose Bowl. Like there's still a lot of time here for any potential staff changes to take place. The other thing that I want to bring up, it is transfer portal season. There's no reason to put added strain or added things to do on your to-do list right now when you're trying to recruit guys, get the roster set. For example, and I'm just using, Coach Cap could very well be around in 2026. So I'm not going to speak definitively on this at all, but using him as the example, because he's one of the coaches that a lot of people have been talking about in this sense. He's a good recruiter. Right now you're trying to recruit guys and you want stability. You don't want to, hey, we don't even know who your offensive line coach is going to be. Like this can all hurt you when you're trying to have a lot of turnover with your offensive line. You're trying to get some of these guys to commit and get in there. You're not trying to bait and switch people, as far as the offensive line coach, but at the same time, to create that problem right now would not be beneficial. Number two, you start talking about potential replacements. And yes, Sam Pittman's a name that comes up a lot, and Scott Huff is a name that comes up a lot. Not saying it would be either one of those two guys at all, but at the same time, a guy like Scott Huff, if you are Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, you're looking at him and you're saying, well, he's coaching for an NFL playoff team right now for the Los Angeles Rams. He's the tight ends coach. We're not going to be able to secure that coach right now. Their season's got to end. So from a timeline perspective, it would make sense where the things could actually align. You get past the transfer portal, you get the guys locked in that you're needing and wanting. And then at that point, maybe the Rams season's over. Maybe you can reach out and make a change if that's something you wanted to do. Once again, not saying that that's happening whatsoever. I'm saying that these are possibilities and things to think about. My point is to ask people to exercise caution and patience, because any of these, if we're having this conversation in, mid-February and no staff changes and stuff have taken place and all that, then we can start to have the conversation. Should that have happened? Why didn't it happen? Or they've made the changes and we're now talking about that. But these are just things to keep in mind when it comes to how the approach or the timeline might be for the coaching staff and their approach versus maybe a fan's approach who want a bunch of changes now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You said that so perfectly. Agree with every word. There right now, there's priorities, and there's only so many hours in the day. Right now, the priority of roster retention. That means meeting. That means DeBoer meeting with every single player on the team, and those meetings can't be 2 minutes. Meeting with every single player on the team. So roster retention, priority number one. Priority number two is recruiting transfer portal guys. And it's not just, hey, who does On Three say is good? They're evaluating all these guys themselves. That's a huge undertaking. With there's 1,400 players or more in the portal. I mean, 1/3 of all college football players are in the portal. 1/3. A massive undertaking to evaluate what pieces are going to fit best for you, fielding those calls, talking to the agents. So between those two things, I don't know how there's a single second in the day for staff changes. And Clint made a super point about you're bringing in Jimothy Lewis. You're bringing in Jacarius Peak. What are you going to tell them? Well, we don't have an offensive line coach, but trust us, we're going to get a good one. I'd rather put someone in front of them that's got a resume, that's been offensive line coach for a long time, at least as an example of this is the kind of guy, that we have here. I agree with you that when you're recruiting players at that position, the ideal thing is not to have that spot blank. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be a change there. Will there be? I don't know. If we're guessing, my guess is yes, but I'm guessing. And that doesn't have to happen before spring practice starts, which is probably around March 7th, based on when spring practice started a year ago. I'm guessing March 7th. So you got some time for that to happen. So no one needs to be panicked over that or that'll happen when it happens. I'm more focused myself on who are you bringing in, the dudes, because I don't care if you hire the best offensive line coach in the country. If he ain't got dudes, it's not going to work. You got to bring in the dudes first, or the guy's not going to have enough talent to coach. You mentioned Huff, you mentioned Pittman. It's funny, those things could happen. Those things could definitely happen. But the Pittman thing is kind of funny to me in the sense that I think we're behind the Pittman thing because that's a name we all know. That's a name everybody knows. The fans' Rolodex, including my own, the fans' Rolodex of potential coaches is very short. Whereas a head coach's Rolodex, which I don't know those things exist anymore, but they're long, they're big because they know so many people in the industry. Pittman's a name we all know, heck of an offensive line coach. I would just question, if I've got 15, 18, 20 million in the bank, I don't know that I want to work for someone else anymore. I don't know that I want to work as hard as the job requires when I'm already rich and retired for life.
Well,
I don't know that he's going to be interested. He might be. If so, he's a heck of an offensive line coach in his day, a heck of one.
And I will say, number one, I think from a personality standpoint, DeBoer is the type of guy that you would want to work for. Like, I
Yes.
think that like
Yes.
that's, and granted,
Great point.
I think that Pittman is the type of guy that, despite the fact that Kalen DeBoer doesn't really have a prior relationship with him as far as coaching overlap, and he typically likes guys he's familiar with, Pittman's the type of guy you make an exception for. I feel like their personalities would go very well together, and it would be about winning, and there would be no egos and things like that. I mean, I think that's one big concern. A lot of people were just like, hey, get rid of it, bring in Jeremy Pruitt. Well, Jeremy Pruitt, I think he's a heck of a defensive mind, and I do think it, assuming that he gets a lot of this other stuff worked out, he will probably end up being a prominent defensive coordinator once again. From a personality standpoint, how would it work? That is, I'm not saying it wouldn't work. I'm saying I don't know. I would feel a lot more confident in a guy like Sam Pittman to end up, kind of working some of those things out.
Feels like a good match. The fans would love him.
Yeah.
I love Pittman. Pittman, the fans would just love him. He was a great offensive line coach before he was a head coach. To me, it's just a matter of, does he want to work that hard again? It's a hard job. It's a 18-hour-a-day job with like 2 weeks off, and that's great when you're 25 years old and you're climbing the coaching ladder. But when you've already climbed to the top of the ladder and you got all that money in the bank, and he loves this place in Arkansas, he just built a restaurant or owns a restaurant in Hot Springs, that sells beer and the food he likes. It's just easy to imagine Pittman going, I'm not going to do this coaching thing again. But if he does, I would be so excited, because I love what you said about the personality fit. And that's true. DeBoer is a coach they guys want to work for, because he's a nice guy. We talk about it all the time. It's an asset he has. He's a nice guy. Scott Huff, the other name that comes up quite a bit. The issue there to me is just, well, obviously he was a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line coach under DeBoer. The fit with DeBoer and Grubb would be obvious. I would just once again point most coaches today, I'm not saying 100%, most coaches prefer working in the NFL to college football right now, because college football is so messy. The calendar is a nightmare, and you get no time off. You get literally like 2 to 3 weeks of vacation. Oh, and during your vacation, you're fielding recruiting. You're talking to kids on the phone, recruiting during the one vacation time that you get. The NFL has a lot of time off, and you don't recruit, and it pays well. And Scott Huff worked for the Rams. Not everybody who listens to the show keeps up with NFL football. If you don't, the Rams are really good. They're in the playoffs. They're likely to win their first round game in advance. And the coach is that's probably about as stable a coaching situation as there is in the NFL. I don't think the Rams, the head coach is going nowhere, and I doubt they have huge staff shakeup after such a successful season. So I would just, I'm not assuming anything. I would just say that if Scott Huff prefers to stay in the NFL, that would not be a surprising decision.
That is very fair. That is very, very fair. And I mean, it's like I've already said before, he's doing a good job. Colby Parkinson and what he's been able to do at tight end for them. I think Terrence Ferguson is really starting to come on, the second round pick. Has some limitations as far as the blocking, but has really come on. They got Tyler Higbee. Like, he has a good position group, and I think he's done a pretty good job of developing those guys. So, if you're having success and you're having success on that level, I think that is there's something to be said there, and I think that's a very fair point.
How about this fun conspiracy point? The GM of the Rams, I'm pretty sure it's Les Snead.
Yes.
Auburn guy. So, so what happens when Alabama calls and says, we want to talk to one of your coaches under contract, Scott Huff, and Les Snead's like, this is Alabama? Yeah. So, hold on one second. He calls Scott Huff on the other line and says, how does a raise sound to stay in LA? You know what I mean?
Especially when he's doing his job well.
I'm having fun with that, but that is kind of funny that
funny.
An Auburn guy is Scott Huff's true boss there.
And one of the things, and I don't like saying this stuff publicly. I'm going to try to be careful, because but I also think the familiarity with Scott Huff with Ryan Grubb from a personnel decision standpoint, I have heard that maybe the offensive line coach and the offense coordinator didn't always agree on personnel decisions, and that could have actually led to some of the rotation. I know a lot of that had to do with like injury and you didn't really have anybody that was solidified in certain spots. All of that factored in. But I think there was some, some internal struggle a little bit. And I'm not saying that it was toxic or anything like that. I think the relationship is just fine. But my point, and the whole reason I bring that up, is to point out that a guy like Scott Huff knows Ryan Grubb, knows how he operates. They've done it together. It's worked. And so from Alabama's perspective, going after a Scott Huff type of guy, it would make sense from that standpoint if there was any sort of riff, which once again, I've talked to one person about it. They would be in the know, but they also, a lot of times I don't like running, and I'm sure fans are going to run with that and it's going to cause problems. But the point is that the offensive line has to get fixed in 2026. It has to. And if that's Coach Cap, if that's, I don't care what you do, what you feel is best. I'll sit there and I might agree with it. I might disagree with it on this show. Like, I'm going to be honest about how I feel about things, but you got to do what you feel like is best, because in a lot of ways, it's DeBoer and Grubb that's kind of not coaching for their lives by any means, but it's their ass on the line overall. So that's it's right. Like if they're not going to, they shouldn't do what Clint Lamb thinks they should do. If they feel like that it's best for them and best for the team and best for righting the ship on the offensive side of the football, that's what they got to do. Go down swinging your own way, not the way that everybody tells you should be going down swinging. So like that's and I know that me talking like that, it makes it sound a lot more dark than I intend for it to. But that's my point, is you got to do as a coaching staff, and Kalen DeBoer has to do what he feels like is best for him and for Alabama. And so I will trust him to do the best, to do that to the best of his abilities, but you've got to get better play out of that position. Do you have anything else on that?
Yeah. A lot of people disagree with me on this, but this is the way I've always felt. This isn't a DeBoer thing. I've just always felt this way about, when fans or people like say, hey, you got to make a change at offensive line coach. You got to make a change at linebacker coach. You got to make a change at DB coach. You know who's ultimately responsible for the play of the offensive line at Alabama? It's not Coach Cap. It's Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer is who is responsible for the play of the offensive line. He knows this, and like you said, it's his ass on the line. Whether there's a change in offensive line coach, to me, I'm completely fine with whatever Kalen DeBoer thinks I'm good with. Whatever he thinks I'm good with, as long as he understands, and we know he does, it's him that he is responsible for the performance of the offensive line. So whatever he wants to go with, fine. But ultimately, if the offensive line is terrible in the fall, then obviously Kalen DeBoer is not going to be at Alabama very long. I mean, and he knows this. Everyone's got to know that. So I don't really have strong. I know I'm supposed to be the opinion guy. That's the job here, right? But I don't really have a strong opinion on making assistant coach changes outside of, well, the head coach is responsible for the performance of each position group. He is who will pay the price if it doesn't perform as well as it needs to have success.
That's exactly right. And that's, I have my opinions on it. I do, but at the same time, I also understand it's not my call. And I can sit here and complain about it and say, I think by this point, I try to own when I am wrong, so everybody knows that I'm wrong. Like, I'm never right all the time. So, this is just strictly how I feel. And there's so much that's still up in the air as far as this offense is concerned. And that's something else that I want to kind of move on and talk about a little bit, is starting with the running backs. We are going to get to Ty Simpson and what it means for the quarterbacks and everything else. But let's talk about running back, because not only are they bringing in a guy like Hollywood Smothers, the NC State running back, for a visit, very much like him, but you also Raleek Brown, the Arizona State running back. This is the number 2 and number 3 transfer portal running backs available according to On3 Rivals. And when you start looking at both of these players, they're really, really good players. They add a level of explosiveness and something from a creativity standpoint that I really feel like was lacking in the room in 2025. Now, here's something that I'll say. I saw another video once again. I watched a lot of different things, so it's tough to remember where everything came from. But essentially, they were saying that they felt like that Alabama needed to bring in multiple running backs, and they had to swing for the fences and get things right on that front. You've already brought in one. That's Xavier Crowell. You don't want to bank on a high school kid. Don't get me wrong, but you also don't sign a running back prospect like that and then turn around and go sign two guys to be your two lead horses. And essentially, before he can even get on camp or really, start to make an impact on campus, you've already pretty much solidified his status as RB3 at best as a true freshman. I don't think that's the way to go about it. The fact that you got Daniel Hill, the fact that you got AK Deer, like you got other guys who, if you bring in one strong player who can change that room, and then maybe you can get development from like an AK Deer or further development from Daniel Hill, and then you can get the impact that I think you can get out of a Xavier Crowell, I think you really improve that room without having to swing for the fences on two, which would be very expensive in my opinion. So to me, it's either Raleek Brown or Hollywood Smothers, or maybe it's somebody else. But I think that you can tell very quickly they were connected to Hollywood Smothers. And then soon after it was Brown. Them solidifying one of these guys, I think could really, really help the run game and the offense overall in 2026.
Yeah, love both. Love both. I think either would be highly impactful minute number one, and more than capable of being an SEC quality starter. I've not watched as much Raleek Brown. I watched a long Hollywood Smothers kind of highlight tape, and he's fantastic. I would be excited about that. But Clint's right. I wouldn't understand bringing in two. I would be critical of that. I don't understand bringing in two when you have Crowell and Deer in particular. I would worry you're going to run one of them off. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen, but heck, I'm a worrier. I don't understand bringing two. I definitely bring in one. And people say, well, why are you recruiting two? Well, why does everyone assume you're going to get who you want? It doesn't work that way. It didn't even work that way when Nick Saban was here prior to NIL and rev share. It didn't even work that way then. You got to cast a wide net because you're not always going to get your top target, whoever that is. So there has to be a backup plan. And if you want to watch a program slip, have your backup plan be someone well beneath plan A. So plan A is up there, but plan B is way down here. And you got to sign plan B. You need multiple plan A's is what you need when you recruit. And that's why they cast a wide net. To me, it's casting a wide net. Hollywood Smothers is on campus today as we record. I would love it. But if he leaves and doesn't commit to you, you're bringing in Raleek Brown, the next day. And maybe he does. And I'm imagining or guessing, Clint, it's going to be one or the other there, hopefully for Alabama's sake. And that would be a great addition because the offensive line, hey, it does feel like a blow up rebuild there, start all over, running back. I sort of feel like the same way, like what they were doing at running back. Maybe it wasn't the running back's fault, but it just wasn't working. And adding new blood that is a gifted college football player would be a shot in the arm. So I'm excited about Hollywood Smothers or Raleek Brown because I sort of look at them similarly, but because I've already watched a lot of Smothers, I sort of fell in love with him. So I'm sort of hoping it's him.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. Like I watched a lot of Hollywood Smothers and kind of had my exposure to him more so from a scouting standpoint before Raleek Brown. And I actually just got around to Raleek Brown and watching him pretty extensively right before we hopped on this video. Mm-hmm. And I more so understand where people are coming from because I very much lean Smothers. Now, granted, I think overall probably I still do, but Brown's a really good player. Here's what I'll say about both. I think from like Raleek Brown, I think he had, close to 200 carries, like 186 carries, just over 1,100 yards, only like 4 touchdowns, but he averaged like 6.1 yards per carry. He also is a guy who got some volume in the passing game, 34 catches, 239 yards, and a couple of more scores. So kind of from a production standpoint, a little bit more, obviously, but kind of Damian Harris-esque from that season where he went for 1,000 yards, but he only had like 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns.
Yeah.
That was kind of strange to me because normally when you got 1,000-yard rusher, it's bare minimum 8, 9, 10 rushing touchdowns to go with it. And when I first saw that from Raleek Brown, I thought that was strange. But as you watch, you kind of understand it a little bit. He's listed at 5'9", 195 pounds. I've seen some places say that he's running in the 4.3s. I don't know if that's true or not. That would be crazy. but he is like quick. He's compact. He's powerful in some ways. Not saying he's this player to this extent, but in some ways, he reminds me of like a Ray Rice, where Ray Rice, I think he ended up at the combine, he was 5'8", 199 pounds, but listed on the Rutgers roster when he was there, he was 5'9", 195 pounds, which is exactly what Raleek Brown is. And I think from a receiving standpoint, from a rushing standpoint, got that explosiveness, that quickness. I think there are some similarities there. He is not overly big, but he's more powerful, especially being 5'9", probably 5'8.5" if I had to guess. Being 195 pounds he's very compact. He's a lot more powerful than you would think or realize. The other thing too is not only do I think you get the rushing element, the receiving element, but also at least in the early portions of Arizona State's season, he was also a return man. He had a couple of 31-yard punt returns. He had a couple of 35-yard kick returns. And so you're losing Cole Adams. You maybe are looking to get more on special teams. Not saying you bring him in to be your starting running back and you make him a return guy. But if he is, if Xavier Crowell ends up being that dude and Brown ends up being your RB2 or something like that, he can also make an impact on special teams, add some explosiveness there. I think he's got some versatility to his game. As far as Hollywood Smothers, north-south runner, contact balance is excellent. He's only 5'11", 195 pounds, so not as compact as Raleek Brown, but just very explosive. And I think in this run game, you need more explosiveness. You need more creativity. I understand that everybody wants the offensive line to improve and there to be big, gaping, giant holes. Yes, that would be awesome. But there's something to be said about sometimes the running back, it's not there. And that doesn't mean the play has to be over. If you've got a guy who can create, you can compensate for those moments. And maybe those moments, especially in 2025, are way too common. They're still going to happen. And so if you've got a guy who can kind of do some things and create on his own, that can certainly help your run game as well. And I think both Raleek Brown and Hollywood Smothers, both of those guys add some explosiveness, some playmaking ability, and I think both would fit really well. The only thing I will say about Hollywood Smothers is that when you look at Raleek Brown, he was responsible for 186 of 301 of Arizona State's running back carries. That's over 60% of the workload, but it's him with 186, and the next highest player, the next highest running back only had 56. You look at Hollywood Smothers, I think he's more so built for the committee approach. He's already done that at NC State. He thrived in that area. So I think as far as kind of creating the room for a Xavier Crowell and maybe, a Daniel Hill or AK Deer or whatever, maybe Smothers would fit a little bit more because it feels like Raleek Brown, especially once he became Arizona State's guy, he got more of the Dylan Johnson type of treatment in that backfield. So it's a little bit different. Not saying that Raleek Brown can't handle being in a committee, but sometimes those types of players, they do well with the more touches they get. And if you're trying to have this committee and get guys like Xavier Crowell touches, it might be better to go with a guy like Smothers. I'm saying these are the different things to look at when it comes to that position.
Yeah, and I like how you brought up, just quickly, I like how you brought up about Smothers. What stood out to me, two things quickly that made him like, wow, he would be such a good fit here. Making something out of nothing. That's exactly what stood out to me about, like, on a few of his highlight runs, there was contact in the backfield. He was having to dodge people prior to getting to the line of scrimmage. Did it stop him? I'm sure it stopped him a lot of the time, but it didn't stop him every time. He can make you miss. He's not a one cut and go guy. He can make you miss, and that stood out to me. And the second thing that stood out to me, he's got really good hands, and I think under DeBoer that's a must, that the running back has to catch the ball. And Hollywood's a natural pass catcher, and I think he would be option A in terms of running routes, catching the ball, making a play that way. So I think he'd be a great fit. But I don't look at Raleek Brown as a consolation prize in any way. They're
Right.
really a 1A and a 1B. Doesn't matter to me which one it is. I hope for Alabama's sake it's one of the two, and then move on, because I think then you're set, because now you're adding that to Daniel Hill and Kevin Riley, to say nothing of AK Deer and EJ Crowell, who I think have crazy next level type potential.
Yeah, and I'm not saying Raleek Brown doesn't have this. I'm saying I don't know. But one thing that I've heard about Hollywood Smothers is that he is a great locker room guy from a sideline energy perspective, very high energy. and kind of brings that team first mentality, which is why I think from a welcoming the committee approach as far as that run game, definitely a player that you can rely on or lean on. But also, I think he definitely has that team first mentality based off of what I've heard about him, and I think that would be beneficial. And here's the thing: in my opinion, what you want is you want a guy who, if it can be your RB1 and can be the guy that if you need to lean on him or rely on him, can be that guy that really carries your backfield and gives you more production on the ground. But also somebody that is, how would they fit if Xavier Crowell does get on campus? He is that dude. He does become this star phenom running back, and he's now your RB1. How would that coincide with one of these two guys that you bring in? How welcoming would they be to that kind of play, the RB2 or maybe 1A, 1B? These are all things that maybe you need to think about, but I think that both of them would welcome it. I think it would only help them from a tread standpoint. It gives you the big platform where NFL teams are going to be watching Alabama closely and what they have from an NFL draft perspective, but you don't have to get this massive workload and get the crazy, 1,500 yard season production to be recognized. If you're in a committee and you're performing, you save tread, which can make you more desirable, but you also get to put your skill set on full display for NFL evaluators. And this offense, when it operates correctly, it does a good job of highlighting the running back position and kind of showing off some versatility as far as what you can do as a runner, what you can do as a receiver. It's going to ask you to pass block. It's going to ask you to do several different things. So I really think that both of those two guys would fit in tremendously. Final thing that I want to talk about is the quarterback position. And, there have been reports from Tom Loy with 24/7 Sports yesterday when I talked about this. I couldn't remember who it was. I think I gave Pete Nakos credit. Tom Loy was the one who said this. But essentially, what he's been reporting is that Ty Simpson is weighing his NFL draft decision. If he gets a first-round grade, he's probably leaving. If he doesn't, then it is possible that he enters the transfer portal, and the two teams that were listed as possible destinations were Oregon and Tennessee. A lot of people have kind of pushed back on that here recently and pretty much said if he doesn't go to the NFL, he's staying at Alabama. What are your thoughts on Ty Simpson and this looming decision that is going to have a massive impact on Alabama's 2026 outlook? Because as much as I love Keelan Russell, and if they decide to go that route, I'm totally fine with it. But you got to think a uncertainty at quarterback, a non-sure thing, and I guess Ty Simpson in some ways is a non-sure thing as well. But having a returning starter leading the charge versus having a new starter, I think that's a little bit different of an approach for the offseason. Just what are your thoughts on Ty Simpson and kind of where things stand with him?
Yeah, based on what I know, sources near Ty. I mean, I think largely what Tom Loy reported, I think is accurate. I mean, I think they're looking into whether he's going to be a first round pick, and they feel like if he's going to be a first round pick, and they feel really good about that, then he's going to enter the draft. That makes perfect logical sense to me. Why would you? The first round picks are not later round picks. Those are guaranteed 5-year deal, guaranteed. Oh, well, they're guaranteed 4-year deals with a team option for a 5th year that's oftentimes picked up, but it's guaranteed over multiple years, and it's the investment. First round picks aren't cut. First round picks are given a lot of leeway. There's a lot of rope there because they've made such an investment. They invest in the first round, and you're an investment, so you're going to be developed, or
and even if it doesn't work
trying.
out with you as a starter, your possibility of being a very handsomely played backup for a very long time is very high.
That's exactly right. So I get that entirely. Now, what happens if they are not convinced he will be a first-round pick? Then I think he returns to Alabama, and I think Alabama should be excited about that if it plays out that way, because you have to remember there were 2 Ty Simpsons in 2025. There were 2. The first version of Ty, we have to remember, was leading Heisman straw polls, was being talked about as the overall number 1 pick in the draft, and across the board, Alabama fans were thrilled. Ty 2.0, it wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough, and it was frustrating to watch. So why were there 2 ties? He was hurt. He was hurt. I mean, that's why there were 2 ties. I don't think his production just fell off a cliff for no reason. I mean, he was hurt. There's been reporting on that now that everyone knows. And there's every reason to believe that if Ty comes back, you're getting a more experienced, more mature version of Ty 1.0 next fall. Not the Ty that we saw late in the year that had the back, the ribs, the muscle thing, the arm, the problem with his elbow, and just getting hit constantly behind that offensive line. And yeah, I would be excited if Ty returns. And I'm excited about both Austin Mack and Keelan Russell if he doesn't. And I find it interesting that Austin Mack has not entered the portal. I would think that's a tell as to Ty, because if Ty's returning for sure, my expectation is that Austin Mack would enter the portal, and that hasn't happened yet. I like what I saw of Austin Mack in the second half of Indiana enough to be, what's he going to look like with a lot of starter reps and as another year older. And of course, Keelan, I've always compared him to I've always compared Keelan as a prospect to Tua and Bryce, in the sense that I think Keelan Russell has that level of talent. And you're talking about the number 1 pick and the number 5 pick in the draft. I mean, I've backed off that at all. I think Keelan's that level of talent. But like Bryce and Tua, they weren't year 1 starters either. So the fact we haven't really seen Keelan a lot yet means nothing to me. I still hold him in that high regard. So I'm going to be excited about the quarterback position at Alabama with or without Ty. It's just about him accumulating the information he needs to feel good about being a first-round pick.
There's a lot of different ways that this can work out. Like there really is. I would say based off of what I saw against Indiana, I liked a lot of what I saw from Austin Mack. I think he's made growth based off of what I saw back in the spring from him. And as far as the turnover-worthy plays and putting the ball in harm's way, I saw improvement from that in a very hostile situation against a very good defense that was ready to try to single-handedly end the Alabama reign. I mean, that's what it felt like with the way that game was playing out. He stood in there and he made some good plays. The offense didn't function great. I think a lot of what was around him kind of had given up. They had accepted their ass whipping. So, I mean, that's what it was. But at the same time, like the scenario I'm about to lay out doesn't include Austin Mack. But I want people to understand, if he ends up being in Tuscaloosa in 2026, and even if he ends up being Alabama's starter, which I think right now between the 3 guys probably would be the least popular amongst fans, I wouldn't be upset with that. I think he's got a lot of potential. But I think the ideal scenario for Alabama would be if Keelan Russell was willing to sit for 1 more year. From a developmental standpoint, and you get Ty Simpson back, you get to kind of run that back with him. We also got to remember, and I'm not saying that's going to happen, I'm saying that's the ideal situation. You give Keelan multiple years to prepare to be the starter. People's got to remember, Ty Simpson, yes, this will be year 3 with Kalen DeBoer, but if he ends up going to the NFL, it will be a new offense coordinator, a new play caller once again. Every step of the way, pretty much since he's been at Alabama, it's been play caller after play caller, and Jalen Milroe dealt with the same thing. It wasn't any different for him. But I think giving Ty Simpson some stability with not only getting that year 3 under Kalen DeBoer, but year 2 under Ryan Grubb, I think that would be beneficial for him from a developmental standpoint. And I agree with you that, like, there's still a ceiling there. There's still where it's like you can end up having a really, really good, really effective offense. I'm telling you, if you just fix the offensive line and the run game, I think Ty Simpson and the passing game are completely different than what you even saw. The fact that he was so productive for a while, carrying everything. Everybody in the SEC, you have to be able to run the football. That's what we all talk about, right? Alabama had one of the worst rushing offenses that I've seen in Tuscaloosa since I've been keeping up with this, maybe of all time. And yet, so they didn't get that element at all. And yet you still saw Ty Simpson show first-round traits, show a high-level ability to execute an offense, dissect things. And yes, things fell off. I do think a lot of that was injury related. So I can't say to what extent. I can't give you a percentage. It would be a pure guess. Maybe I would be giving the injuries too much credit. And a lot of it was just the lack of confidence. He started to fall off himself. Maybe you get into the next season and he's healthy, but you still have some of these issues. I can't guarantee you anything. But what I will say is getting your starting quarterback back and knowing that he has the potential to be very, very productive would be big for Alabama. With that being said, if he gets a first-round grade, it's a kind of weaker quarterback class. He elects to go. He's projected to go in the first round, and they have to move on to Keelan Russell. I would be fine with that. There would be more uncertainty. We wouldn't know exactly what it's going to look like. Everybody just assumes that Keelan is going to be the next prodigy and Mr. Everything, and I think that is a very, very high chance. Like, it's very likely. It's also not a guarantee. So there will be things where we talk about, okay, what's the upside? What's the downside? Like, how could this end up looking? Either way, I'm kind of okay with it. There's not a scenario. I would hate to lose Keelan for the future, but I think in 2026, if they have Ty Simpson, even if they lost Keelan, while that would not be ideal, I'm still excited about Alabama's offense in 2026. And then from that point, you just got to make sure that you're getting, I think Jet Tamala, from a rawness standpoint, but from like an overall physical makeup, I think he's got a lot of ability and talent. Like, he would get to sit and develop for a year. I don't know. I don't know how it will end up working out, but it is something to at least keep in mind.
Yeah, and like I said about Ty 1.0 and Ty 2.0, the NFL sees a lot of the same things we do. I think, in terms of me selling you guys on, hey, there was a Ty 1.0 and a Ty 2.0, the NFL is probably not taking Ty 2.0 in the first round of the NFL draft. I mean, what they want is the Ty they saw earlier in the season, and Ty kind of convincing them, well, really, it was the back and my injury situation and not feeling great. And at the same time, I had no running game. Defense has sort of figured out how one-dimensional we are, and a lot of my supporting cast got hurt. I mean, that was a factor too. But the NFL wouldn't be talking about taking Ty in the first round without that version of Ty 1.0 that I'm talking about that Alabama would be getting. But no, I'd be excited either way, and agree with you about Austin Mack. I think Austin Mack is going to push Keelan. Hey, look, if Ty's gone and it's Austin Mack and Keelan, I think I'm going to likely. I still want to see some of spring practice first, but I'm likely going to say I think Keelan's going to win this job ultimately, but I think Austin Mack will push him further than the conventional wisdom would be. I think most fans will be like, Keelan's job, Keelan's the guy. I'll be like, probably. I think Austin Mack's going to push him through the spring, into fall camp, maybe even into the games before it's ultimately decided. I think it's going to be close, but I would agree that ultimately it would be Keelan. But before I get too emphatic about that, I want to see some spring practice.
Yeah, and one final thing that I'll say, the NFL, they have such a developmental problem, like as far as developing guys, and I think it's more than just the quarterback position, but I think the quarterback position is the biggest one on display. And I think Phillip Rivers being brought back at 44 years old as a grandpa is a perfect illustration of that. They trusted his ability after 5 years of not playing in the NFL, or 4 years, just about 5, that they trusted him from his processing standpoint, understanding what defenses are giving him, learning the playbook, and executing it at a level that can help them win football games because they were still in the playoff hunt at that time. They trusted that more than these young guys from a development standpoint that don't see the kind of things that they need to see in order to put them in a position to be successful playing the quarterback at a very high level. The reason that I say that is if you put Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson side by side, from a physical trait standpoint, Ty Simpson does not touch Jalen Milroe. But remember, Milroe was being viewed as a possible first-round draft pick because of those tools. He ended up falling to late on day 3 and into the 3rd round. Why did he do that? I think that you put him on a whiteboard and you talk about some of those development things and understanding coverages and where to go with the football and just impressing you in that sense. I think in the shorts and running and doing all those things was going to wow you. But I think where the NFL is at right now, I look at a guy like Ty And I think if he's projected to go in the first round, I would probably have a little bit more confidence that he was going to stick there. Why? Because in this whole pre-draft cycle, I think you put him on a whiteboard and he's going to show you some things and do some things from it's being a coach's son. It's playing, he's just got a great understanding. It's where he is probably the strongest, where he's going to wow NFL teams enough where that will allow him to stick. It's not a projection as much with him as it would be like a man. From a physical gift standpoint, Jalen Milroe brings incredible stuff. But as far as can he understand or learn what we're doing offensively to an extent where he can do everything that we require, that's something that I think he's going to get there. I really think he's going to end up being a good player. The fact that he's being given time to sit and develop and learn, and they're not making him like a Swiss Army knife type. I kind of advocated for that to get him an early impact on the NFL level. But the more I thought about it, it's like maybe they shouldn't do that, because then that becomes like your niche, and then you become, next thing you know, you're Taysom Hill. Instead, let him sit and develop at the quarterback position. I still think he's got an extremely high ceiling. But for Ty Simpson, I feel like that if he's projected to go in the first round, I would be very shocked, because he's not going to do anything from athleticism. They're not looking at him expecting some crazy good athlete, and all of a sudden he disappoints. Now he's falling out of the first round. I think if he's being projected to go there, it's because of what he has, between the years. And I think ultimately he would probably stick there, because at that point, NFL teams would know that he's got limited experience. They would know that going in when he gets his NFL draft grade. That won't change. So I don't see anything really holding him back. So I would feel more confident about him going in the first round than I would Jalen Milroe, and the fact that he was projected and ended up ultimately falling.
Yeah, and one final point, quickly, in terms of like where Ty could go, like how certain does he look like a first round pick? We'll see what happens with free agency, but right now the draft order, and you have to look at that. Number 1, Raiders, probably going to want a quarterback. Number 2, Jets, probably going to want a quarterback. It's a good year to be considered a top 3, even top 4 type quarterback. Because let's say Dante Moore does come out, and you got Mendoza, of course. Mendoza could go 1 and Dante Moore could go 2. The next guy's probably going to go in the first round also. Maybe later, but maybe that's a great spot for him. Going in the first round, but going somewhere in the mid to late 20s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Doesn't have to play right away. Going to a
Rams,
ideal. Going to a winning team, backing up a veteran, learning from Matt Stafford, then that'd be ideal. So, maybe he does come out. I had my doubts about a month ago. I'm like, I don't think Ty's coming out, because I don't think he's going to be a first round pick. My mind's been changing. I can kind of see it now that he would be a first round guy. And you make a great point about the whiteboard, and Ty's just sort of, I think, built to do that high level stuff. That's why the NFL was loving him back in September, October,
right,
when they were seeing the healthy Ty Simpson.
They weren't seeing anything from a physical perspective that was like, wow, this guy's incredible. Nothing. He wasn't throwing the football like with just elite arm strength. That's everybody's like, wow, this guy's got a cannon. He can best arm in the NFL. There's nothing. If you don't look at his size, you don't see Anthony Richardson from a size perspective. You don't look at him running and say, wow, that guy's an incredible runner. It was what he has between the years, which is what was making him so desirable. I think that desire would still be there. That's kind of my entire point. Great way to close that out. Appreciate the conversation, Jimmy. We'll be talking about Devin Tompkins and Caleb Woodson and some of those players. I've already touched on them a little bit, but I've been diving into all these transfer portal guys, trying to stay ahead of it. Also, it might be beneficial if I just took a step back and let it play out a little bit, see who committed, and then react. But we're going to be talking about a lot of these guys and how they could potentially fit, and I think that'll be a lot of fun. But I think this was a great conversation today, Jimmy. I know we went a little longer, but healthy conversation. A lot going on right now with Alabama. Appreciate you as always. Do you have anything else to add before we hop out of here?
Nope. Just looking forward to seeing, with the portal, there's been a lot of subtractions, but the additions are now coming, and I think everyone's going to feel better about it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, man. That's a great point, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they try to fix some of these problems. I mean, they had a lot of issues this season, especially offensively, and there's an opportunity. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how they try to attack things in the offseason. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. If you haven't already, get on over to rowback.com. Use the promo code Crimson20 to get 20% off your order, and we will talk to you guys soon.